radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. And boy, was there chaos this week. This is episode 22, recorded on Friday, January 29th from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
And on today's episode, we will discuss the HBO docuseries The Vow, a story about the cult of NXIVM and how it can teach us about cult behavior.
Getting away from a politics-heavy main segment this week.
We are on a beeline to be the most cult-heavy politics show in the United States right now.
A little late to this party, but that's all right. With the election finally done and decided, we can take up this topic, which we've been talking about doing for a while now. And I think both of us kind of want a break from politics as the main segment.
But of course, more chaos filled in the gap for us anyway.
Now let's talk about politics in the headlines.
Let's do it. To the news.
The fact is that everything he's saying so far is simply a lie. I'm not here to call out his lies. Everybody knows he's a liar.
First up in headlines, Jason, you didn't want to talk about any presidential stuff, so we're going to talk about presidential stuff.
Let's go.
All right. President Biden has been extremely busy, being the most activist president ever, according to all my Republican friends. Is this true?
As long as you ignore all of the rest of presidential history, sure.
All right, sounds good. At least that's what I thought too. President Biden signed several executive actions over the last week, including banning Trump's transgender military ban. Again,
banning his ban?
Banning the ban. Again, remember when that was a scandal? Which was totally terrible at the time too. So this is fantastic. I'm super happy about this. We finally got back to level 0 of how bad this country could be. Also, the Biden administration will look to expedite getting Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill.
Which should have been done already.
Back in 2016. For those of you who don't remember, President Barack Obama was actually planning on getting that implemented, but then something happened in 2016 and someone stopped it. I wonder who.
And I wonder why.
Exactly. But we're back on track now, and not only has he brought it back, but he's going to make sure to expedite the process to get rid of Andrew Jackson forever.
Now we need to get Hamilton off the $10 bill.
And replace him with a portrait of Lin-Manuel Miranda as Hamilton. This is the future progressives want. And finally, that's not actually close to finally, but finally for things that we're going to talk about, Biden also ordered the DOJ to end private prison contracts as part of a racial equity push. Again, I am so happy.
Yeah, we should not have any private prisons. Now, this just applies to federal prisons.
This does.
So there are still obviously state prisons that are private and will continue. So pressure your governors.
Yep.
To get rid of the private state prisons.
But this is a great step in a really good direction for all of us, so celebrate the victory while we have it, until Republicans do something stupid to screw with it. I don't know.
My biggest issue with the private prisons is they're incentivized to not rehabilitate prisoners, because having a larger prison population is profit.
Exactly, and the fact that we even have money at all as any kind of incentive for these prisons is the worst idea to have for a prison system.
Only in America. Switching over to Russia, there were a number of protests in support of Alexei Navalny, who is the number one vocal opponent to Vladimir Putin.
So, Jason, I had to put this in here because have you seen anything about this?
I know that this resulted in him being arrested when he went back to Russia after recovering from being poisoned, and his wife was arrested as well. But beyond that, I have not really been keeping up.
So the story behind this is absolutely insane. So that's why I almost had this as our main segment because it's so insane. But I've seen a lot of people already talk about it, so I didn't want to kind of go into the same stuff that they were doing. Long story short, Alexei Navalny, like Jason said, was the main opponent of Vladimir Putin for the presidential election race. He ended up taking about 25% of the vote, which, looking back from where we are in this country, doesn't seem like a lot. But that is miles and miles ahead of any other opponent who ever challenged Putin before. So this is a big deal that he even got 25% of the vote. Also, keep in mind that Russia's elections are totally rigged, and this is a terrible fascistic government doing all this stuff.
And it got his underpants poisoned.
Yeah. And we'll get to that. So long story short, Navalny loses, but he never gives up. And he is actually known as a very populist figure in Russia. Unfortunately, he's very Trump-esque as well, where he says a lot of crazy unhinged things. But he also just speaks for the people and is against the Russian establishment, which gets a lot of views on social media like Twitter and Facebook and things like that.
I hear he's got a really big online presence.
And that's where like all of his power comes from. He is like Trump and AOC, but crazy Russian guy.
He's the political Logan Paul of Russia.
Oh my God. I feel like that's an insult to him.
Who, Logan Paul or Navalny?
Take your pick.
We need to get someone to poison Logan Paul's underpants. Not an actual threat.
Isn't Logan Paul doing no, that's Jake Paul. Jake Paul's doing the more pro boxing thing now, right?
Yeah, he just knocked out some ex-NBA player or something.
Super, political news here. Who did Jake Paul fight in the last boxing bout? So Navalny continued his activism, even to the point where Putin threatened to arrest him for whatever charges he could think of. While he was touring around the country, several threats came on for him, I think, and his supporters. Navalny eventually had to go to Germany for something, I can't remember what it was for, and I apologize. Where on the flight to Germany, he just immediately starts breathing heavily and collapses onto the floor of the plane. People start freaking out, thinking immediately that he got poisoned by somebody, probably the Russian government, and rumors start spreading like crazy. What happened to Navalny? What happened to Navalny? What happened to Navalny? They make it to Germany, and Navalny actually survives. A bunch of world leaders call this out, including Angela Merkel, Joe Biden, and many others, saying that Putin needs to come clean about what happened and to make sure that Navalny is safe and not harmed. Navalny, being the antagonist that he is, challenges Putin to arrest him, saying that he is going to go on a flight back to Russia the minute that he's healthy. And he does. He buys a plane ticket and goes immediately to Russia. Before his flight, he actually takes a video of himself calling whatever team was supposed to be in charge of poisoning him, I guess, acting as like a KGB agent looking to be briefed on what happened. And somehow on video, now again, I don't know if this is actually true or not, if the phone call is real or not, but people are kind of treating it as real, that Navalny actually gets whatever information he needs acting as a KGB official and gets the guy on the other side to admit that they actually poisoned the lining of his underwear, and that's how they poisoned him on the flight to Germany. He goes, well, I'm going to immediately post this out, and everyone goes absolutely insane, saying, look at what Putin's government did to this challenger of his, calling out for more outcry and calling for more unrest in Russia. Eventually, Navalny gets back to Russia. They arrest him when he comes back because that's what Putin said he was going to do. And before he gets arrested, he puts out a video saying that this is unfathomable, this is uncalled for, and that you need to rise up and get to the streets for this. So within...
And this is while he's in custody.
Right, exactly. So literally the next day, thousands upon thousands of people from, I think it was like about 140 cities across Russia, all protest en masse against Putin and in support of Navalny. And the fact, again, I want to make this very clear, that this is authoritarian Russia where you had pro-Navalny protests in 140 cities across the country, which is insane to think about. This whole story is just one big cluster. And I can't handle this. So as of right now, Navalny is still in custody, and we're expected to see another wave of protests starting this week in Russia. So there's a lot of stuff in Russia happening right now. And you know what? Good. I'm glad people in Russia are rising up for this because obviously Putin's government's terrible. So good for them. Hopefully they all don't get killed.
Good luck, comrades.
Good luck, comrade.
And related to Vladimir Putin, the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump will be coming up soon. The House has delivered the impeachment article to the Senate, which is going to trigger only the fourth impeachment trial of a president in United States history, but the second for Donald Trump. So he's got half of them.
You're right. He's got the most impeachments, the best impeachments.
Definitely the most. Very few Republican senators broke ranks. Only 5 of them voted that this impeachment trial is constitutional.
With their main argument being that you can't impeach or you can't indict a president who's not in office right now, which is ridiculous, by the way.
Yeah, so if you're a president and your term's almost over, because this even took months, right?
Yep.
Once your term is over and you only have a month or 2 left to go, you can just do whatever you want. And they can't impeach you because by the time the trial happens, you won't be president anymore. So it's just a free-for-all right at the end.
Well, I mean, if we're also taking this logic to its logical conclusion, that would also mean that if a president is in trial and probably going to get indicted for doing something so terrible and wrong, he can just resign.
Worked for Nixon.
Right. So that's insane. Do you know the senator who led this charge?
I do not.
Rand Paul.
Oh, actually, yeah, I did know that. I had heard that he was the one to.
Of course it was, right?
Where's Rand Paul's neighbor when you need him? Just invite him to the Senate floor. Rand Paul, keep his mouth shut.
So as of right now, the trial is scheduled to start on February 8th, which is about a week and a half away, depending on when you listen to this. So yeah, get ready for it. I don't expect anything to happen, but it's going to be in the news for a little while.
Hey, Joe.
What, Jason?
What's a stonk market?
I thought you said a skunk market really quick.
Stonk.
The stonks?
The stonks. What's
Big-
going on
big
with the stonks?
Reddit trolls are destroying the world, apparently, of stonks. And my favorite childhood store may be involved in this.
Well, I think that's a big part of the issue. It's a lot of people's childhood favorite store. A lot of people who spend a lot of their time on Reddit.
So if you haven't already heard, which I'm surprised if you haven't, GameStop received a massive push in the stock market this last week due to a bunch of Reddit trolls.
And also, to a lesser extent, AMC and Blockbuster Video.
And Koss. Did you see
Koss,
that?
yeah.
Wisconsin
Wisconsin's own
company
Koss.
Yeah.
Right.
Long story short, GameStop has been going downhill for the last, we'll say, year, but especially during the last 6 or so months. And it makes sense, right? People aren't going to GameStop anymore to buy retail games because you can buy games online. You can buy consoles online now too, so you don't have to actually go to a retail store. And what makes it even worse is the fact that our pandemic is probably hurting their sales even more so because people don't want to go to an actual retail store for anything.
I remember early on in the pandemic, people were pretty upset that GameStops were still open, and even in malls that were closed, they were trying to remain open.
I didn't know that. I'm going to be honest, Jason. It's been a very long time since I've been in a GameStop.
Oh yeah, definitely.
When's the last time you've been in a GameStop?
It's probably been years.
I gotta say it's probably at least been like 4 or 5 for me.
Despite the fact that there's probably 6 within 10 miles of here.
They're like Starbucks of video games. You just they're all over the place.
Which is one of the reasons why I believe they were such an attractive stock to short, whatever that means.
Well, we'll get to that. And for reference, GameStop stock was actually being traded around $13.66 for the majority of, we'll say, the last 4 months before January. Okay, fine. What usually happens in a lot of these cases is what's called shorting. I think Jason mentioned that a little bit ago.
I know the word.
Good, I'm glad.
Don't know what it means, really.
Good. Long story short, this means that investors look at a stock and see that it is going to go down even further in a short period of time. What shorting means is that they're going to then ask the individual who owns stock in that particular company to borrow or lend stock to them for a temporary amount of time with interest. The idea is that you buy stock at a certain price, sell it as quickly as you can to someone else, and then when the price goes even lower, you buy that stock back up to pay back whoever you borrowed those stocks or lent those stocks from, if that makes sense.
You're basically saying, I'm going to borrow these stocks at a price to be determined in the future, and you sell them to whoever wants to buy them, just like a normal transaction. And then once the price goes down to a level that you're comfortable with, then you would actually purchase the stock at that price, therefore making money because you sold it at a much higher price to begin with.
Well, I'm trying to figure out if you have it backwards or not.
No, you borrow it.
Yes.
And then you sell it to somebody else at the current price. And then once the price goes down, then you buy
the stock back.
Right, to give it to fulfill your commitment to the person that you borrowed.
And whatever money you make after that is your profit. It's a very common tactic in stock markets. Okay, fine.
And GameStop would obviously be a good target for this because we all expect they're going to go out of business because they've got 1 million stores that they have to pay rent on.
Exactly.
And they're not making any money.
So many stock investors were actually expecting GameStop to go bankrupt very shortly because of what was going on. So they started shorting GameStop stocks. Oh my God, that's a tongue twister.
I've heard so many different analysts make that same mistake over the past couple days.
They started shorting those stocks like crazy, even to such a point where they were actually shorting more stocks than there were actually stocks that existed. So I think as far as I remember, the last number I saw was they shorted around 160% of actual GameStop stocks.
And now when you say that existed, you mean that are available for trade that day, correct?
Correct. And basically what that means is when you short something, you can short it multiple times to different people, basically.
So one person can lend their stock to multiple people who are shorting it.
Yeah. So basically there's like only one stock of something, but multiple people are owed that stock. That's where that comes from. A Reddit group called Wall Street Bets noticed that this was happening in large amounts. So they said, hey, let's stick it to these Wall Street guys and buy up a ton of stock to raise the price up.
And I think also there was some romanticism involved with it being GameStop.
There was a little bit of that too.
And, online Reddit users are generally going to be people who are familiar with and maybe have some nostalgia towards GameStop.
Within a span of a week, GameStop stock, oh my God, GameStop stock rose 2,000% from its original price before January, which is absolutely insane. It has never been heard of, like, for a random company for this to or for a random company to actually do this. And this was all done by regular people, no crazy millionaires and billionaires who were doing this. It was just people on Robinhood who were said, yeah, I'll buy, 200 shares or something or whatever it may be, right?
Robinhood being a trading app.
Yes, thank you. This sends the market into a frenzy. And this is because, like I said before, you're owed those stocks still with interest. And the idea of shorting something is that you actually have to give that stock back and pay the interest on it. When it goes up a lot, you still owe those stocks at that price to that individual. So you have hedge fund managers on Wall Street who now owe billions of dollars, I think almost to the tune of 1.9 billion total owed now because they shorted so much GameStop stock. And this was all done by regular people through Reddit. So like I said, the entire Wall Street community went out of their mind because people were about to lose tons of money. Those poor hedge fund managers, right?
I saw people on Talking Heads shows saying, like, this is why we need to get rid of no fee trading. We need to have things the way it used to be before everybody could do this online. Basically saying this needs to be back in the hands of only the
super
wealthy.
Yeah,
Yep.
Which is so dumb. And to be honest, there was actually some issue with that. And that's because Robinhood, the investment app Jason mentioned before, actually stopped all buying on GameStop temporarily on that site and only let you sell those stocks of GameStop. And actually, in some particular cases, forced people to sell their stocks of GameStop.
And that did force the stock prices down.
Which was the intent behind it.
Yeah.
So that pissed a lot of people off. And now actually Robinhood is facing a class action lawsuit for what they did to stop people from trading GameStop. This got a lot of attention from various politicians and people like Elon Musk. You may have seen AOC tweet out saying that she needs to look into Robinhood and how they did this. Ted Cruz also chimed in saying that he agreed with AOC. AOC said, screw you. You tried to kill me a week ago. I hate you.
Hell froze.
Right. Even Don Jr. said something, in support of the movement in the case. So I don't even know what's going on. But as of right now, Wall Street is in absolute chaos because at any moment now they realized that a bunch of people can now just inflate a stock if they feel like it, which would throw Wall Street into a complete panic. I'm kind of okay with that.
They're just showing that the system is arbitrary and can be manipulated and can be abused by groups of people.
Right. And let's be real here. There are a lot of pros and cons to what happened, right? So does anyone care about hedge fund managers? No one cares about them. Screw them. Do I care about the people who started investing in GameStop later on, who is going to now lose a lot of money because of this? Yes, that I care about greatly. Do I care about all of the GameStop workers who have no idea what's going to happen with their company in the next week? Yes, I care about them as well. And to some extent as well, we need to also talk about the idea of market manipulation, where this was already a tactic that's been done by other hedge fund managers already, which is called short squeezing, where if they see another hedge fund doing something like shorting a stock, they will intentionally buy a lot of it to raise the stock price up. The problem is when you just manipulate the market like this, it leads to a lot of problems. And where you find that line is very difficult for a lot of economists. So there's a lot of ambiguity and complexity to this thing. But at the end of the day, a lot of rich people lost a lot of money, and I'm okay with that because it was the average Joes that came up, whether it was for nostalgia of GameStop or just to troll the super rich Wall Street bankers. I don't care. I'm just happy that it happened.
It does show that the stock market is not the economy.
Oh, 100%.
Which is what we've been saying since the pandemic, when the president's only concern was the stock market.
I did see a really cute little article about a 10-year-old boy who received like some GameStop stock when he was 8 years old for a birthday gift because he loved GameStop so much because, you're a kid. Well, he cashed in on the GameStop stock going so far up and made, I think, almost $4,000.
That's one thing that I'll give a lot of these Reddit users credit for. They all had to hold on to this.
Yes.
They could have just cashed out right away and the hedge fund would have been fine. The stock price would have went back down and they would have been able to then buy the shares at the lower price like they assumed they would be able to. And, the Reddit people would have still walked away with hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars perhaps, depending on how much they bought. But most of them hung on to it. That I wouldn't, honestly. Even if I was in on this from the beginning because I loved GameStop and I wanted to protect all those people's jobs and I had all the most altruistic ideals, once we were talking about millions of dollars, I would have sold that stock.
Right. So just to close this out to see what's going to happen next, like I said, there is going to be that class action lawsuit against Robinhood to see what's going on with that. Elizabeth Warren did also say that this is a good reason to look into the SEC regulations to see what's going on with that as well. GameStop is still looking pretty nice. Their peak hit actually on January 28th, which was around $469 a share. Again, pretty high up from their $13 a share less than a week ago. And then as of right now, they're looking at around $379 a share, which looks like it is starting to dip just a little bit. And that's because you're seeing, your typical average investors who are on, whatever it's Robinhood or whatever investing app they're using, starting to sell their stock to make sure that they also don't get screwed in the process. So I see the stock going down in the long run. Do not invest in GameStop. I plead that you don't do it because even though you want to stick it to the bankers yourself, you're just going to get screwed out of money in the process. So don't do that at this point. But it was very cool to see happen. It will probably now happen again unless something is done about it, and we'll see what happens with that too.
Please don't take financial advice from us.
Seriously, don't. We're like just two idiots from Wisconsin. Don't do it.
We're recording in my basement right now. Enough said.
But you got that with that sweet Amazon stock you invested in.
Yeah, no, the bank owns my house.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
So let's talk about NXIVM. NXIVM, the worst spelling of anything I've ever seen in my life. And more specifically, let's talk about HBO's docuseries, The Vow, that Jason made me watch for this.
Sorry.
So Jason, tell us about this hell coaster you put me on and why I'm going to basically freak out for the next hour about why this was an absolute insane docuseries.
So we're going to try to run through this fairly quickly. This is a 9-part, hour-long, series.
Very well done, by the
on
way.
HBO, yeah. And the amount of video that they have from inside the cult, because one of the main guys, as we'll talk about, that was in this was a director, so he was filming everything, and they have all of this video. And it makes it like the perfect thing to make a series about because there's just so much footage that they can splice
and phone
in.
calls and audio recordings.
Yeah, the guy recorded everything.
Yeah.
Let's start with some of the people involved in NXIVM and kind of how it began.
Let's do it.
So the co-founder, the kind of the de facto leader, guru, whatever you want to say, Keith Raniere, better known to his followers as Vanguard.
Yep.
Is the leader of a philosophical movement. And it's also an arcade game and Atari game. It's kind of a scrolling shooter. It's no Galaga, I'll tell you that.
It's also a poutine place by my house.
Really?
Yeah, it's really good.
I have to try that out sometime.
Yeah. And the way he was kind of portrayed, at least in the documentary, was people saw him as this supposed genius. They used the phrase the most ethical man in the world multiple times. They talked about how he was in the Guinness Book of World Records for having one of the highest IQs in the world, or scoring having one of the highest scores for an IQ test.
240 was the number, which is just astronomical.
Yeah. There were some other things that they talked about where he supposedly learned French, German, and English before he even learned how to read. He was a black belt in judo. He was a concert pianist, and just like a bunch of crazy stuff. Like he's like this all around amazing human being.
And this is even like from people who became his critics are kind of still portraying him in this light.
Well, and I'd even argue, like, from what I saw in the documentary, he did come off as at least fairly intelligent. I don't know how much of it was like Deepak Chopra style of stuff where he's just talking like in nothingness, but like it did seem like he wasn't like a complete idiot.
Yeah, well spoken.
Yeah.
A lot of what he said was psychobabble and
Well, I totally agree to that.
yeah, and just nonsense words and things that make, like, they seem like they're deep until you actually think about it and go like, what does any of that actually mean? And I'm not, I didn't see what's behind it. I'm a very cynical person. So right away when people start like inventing their own terms for things, I kind of tune out.
He intentionally tried to sound extremely poetic with how he talked and like tried to sound super enlightened with how he spoke as well. There's actually a term called for that, which is a deepity. And that was actually coined by philosopher Daniel Dennett, where basically kind of what Jason said, a deepity specifically means of something that's said that sounds extremely deep and profound, but when you actually think about it for about 5 seconds, they actually didn't say anything at all. It's just nonsense and it's gobbledygook.
And some things that are actual facts about Keith Raniere. He graduated from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which is a nice college, very high-end technical college, with a 2.26 GPA at 22 years old.
Super genius.
So not a child prodigy, didn't go to college when he was 12, even though he's supposed to be one of the 3 smartest people in the world.
How much do you want to bet it's just because if I looked up the fact that he graduated this way at 22 years old, it's because they said that he was too smart for the schools.
He didn't want to do everything was too boring for him.
Right.
So the story that this comes from was one of his ex-girlfriends got this information from his parents when they were dating. And they said, yeah, he bragged about taking all of these high-end science and math classes, and then he failed all of them or just barely passed. So I don't think he's quite the genius that he's portrayed as or that he wants to be thought of as. Some of his history, he was born in 1960. Through the 1980s, he was involved with the multi-level marketing company Amway.
Of course he was. Of course he was.
And by all accounts, he was extremely obsessed with Amway and with Scientology, which we will definitely talk about, and with neuro-linguistic programming. We'll talk about what that is in a second. So those 3 things, honestly, I feel like are the foundation of NXIVM. But what did he do? This genius level, highest IQ in the world. In 1990, he founded Consumers Byline Incorporated.
And what was that?
I kind of remember this. I don't know if I saw infomercials on late at night in the 90s. If I heard about it when it was under investigation, I'm not sure, but I definitely remember seeing the video of the guy from Green Acres, the old guy, the main actor from Green Acres, talking about Consumers Byline. So what this was supposed to be a buying club where everyone joins together and you use your cumulative buying power to get discounts on whatever purchases you want to make. And he structured this company.
So it's like a grassroots Walmart type of thing where
Sam's Club.
Yeah, but almost as like you're trying to put your money together to have the same buying power as Walmart.
Right, Costco.
Yeah. Okay.
And he blames Walmart for the eventual downfall of his company because he was competing with them.
Okay.
So he was under investigation in 1993 by 23 states and 2 attorneys general for running a pyramid scheme.
So he did this before, basically, is what you're saying.
Oh, yeah. All of this makes perfect sense in context. Like, yeah, of course. And this is well known. Like, all of these people in this group could have found out this information because, like I said, I'd heard of Consumers Byline. It's not that hard even before the internet to find out that this guy was involved in this kind of stuff. So the way it worked was they were basically taking memberships from people as they would join this Consumers Byline. And the main focus of the company was not, let's purchase, appliances or vacations or whatever and get discounts. It was, you have to get more people to join the club and then you get commission based on anything that they do. And then they get more people and they get more people. And then eventually you'll be able to make millions of dollars for doing nothing just from all of the commission that's getting kicked up to you, which is a pyramid scheme. So he was ordered to pay a $40,000 fine, which is just ridiculously light. They had, by all accounts, made hundreds of millions of dollars at that point, and he only paid $9,000 to New York for running a giant pyramid scheme. So, okay, that's the end of his multi-level marketing, right? No, of course not. In 1994, he founded the National Health Network, and this was a multi-level marketing company who sold vitamins, and he also had a health store with the same name in New York. That one didn't even get to the point where He was under investigation, and I'm sure it was also a pyramid scheme, but it just plain failed and went out of business in 1999.
So this is just a straight up con man.
Yeah, he just moves from one thing to, and we have some experience with people that do this. You know, they try one thing to get rich and famous. It doesn't work out.
Just go on to another
Just
thing.
go to the next thing. They don't have, it's not about any kind of goal. It's not about, oh, I really want to help people save money. Oh, I'm really enthusiastic about vitamins. I think they could help so many people. It's not about, oh, I really want to teach people how to succeed in the business world. No, it's narcissism. It's all about him. It's about me. I need to be successful. I need to be famous and rich and have all of this power. So you just try anything to try to get it. And he uses all of the tactics that he learned from Amway, everything that he saw from Scientology, anything he could learn from the neuro-linguistic programming to just do anything to succeed.
And I think that puts NXIVM, or whatever it's supposed to be called, in a lot of context then, because we'll talk about it too, but the way they usually frame NXIVM, and even with interviews with Raniere, he'll talk about how the whole idea is to help people and to be the most ethical people and create the most ethical society you can make. So keep in mind that when we talk about how this was supposed to actually be positive and help people, this was in his mind the entire time.
And that leads us to Nancy Salzman, aka
Evil Elizabeth Warren.
or the Prefect, which was her name within the organization. So she is a former psychiatric nurse, also supposed to be like the number 2 practitioner of neurolinguistic programming in the country at the time. And if you want to learn a bit more about neurolinguistic programming, there's a Skeptoid episode. Either you can find it via podcast on any of your podcast apps, skeptoid.com. They also have a YouTube video of this episode. But it's basically a technique that was developed by an undergraduate in psychology that watched a bunch of tapes of a psychotherapist going through therapy sessions and the way he would interrogate somebody in everything they said, like literally any sentence. You could say like, oh, I'm feeling kind of cold right now. He'd say, well, what do you mean cold?
Yeah, just keep diving into specifics of it.
Right. What is cold? How do you define cold? What to you is cold made of? And you just keep breaking down and just nitpicking every single thing they say until they really can't explain anything anymore, and then it's up to you then to fill in the gaps, and they just become like open to whatever you have to say. Like, fine, I don't know anything, just tell me who I am, what's going on here, tell me what you want me to do.
I'm sure we see a lot of this in like very woo-centered style of groups, I'm assuming, where they'll kind of like break it down and say like, well, you have to say I don't know eventually, and then they'll just fill with whatever BS they can come up with.
And if you watch The Vow with that in mind, that he was definitely taught these techniques from Nancy, it makes perfect sense because he does this.
Oh yeah, he does this all the
constantly.
time, yeah.
And it's these techniques, like this is the way he talks to everyone. Interestingly, I believe Nancy was Keith Raniere's girlfriend's therapist at the time that they met.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Okay.
So kind of a oddly unethical way to start a business relationship with someone.
But so fitting though.
Yeah, it's perfect for what this guy would end up doing. So she helped him co-found ESP, which is Executive Success Programs.
Which is usually what they say when referring to the group. They usually call it ESP as opposed to like NXIVM.
ESP is the main group. Like when you went to classes for these people,
it was an ESP group.
Right.
Yeah.
NXIVM was the kind of parent overall company. So that was founded in 1998. And also Nancy's daughter, Lauren, will become a prominent member in the group as well. That brings us to Mark Vincente.
My absolute favorite.
He was a director. He wrote the book, What the Bleep Do We Know? And was one of the directors of that movie. I don't know much about...
I need to vent about this really quick.
Go for it.
So, okay. I didn't know who this guy was when I first started, but it shows that he's like one of the main people we follow in the documentary series. Fine. Okay. Then I find out right away that he wrote and directed What the Bleep Do We Know? Which, by the way, made so much more money than I ever expected it to be. So, what if you don't know... because that's the whole point of the movie. But if you don't know, What the Bleep Do We Know is basically a documentary style film that takes like the worst parts of pseudoscience and combine it with the worst high school philosophy that you could ever imagine. And I know, Jason, we talked about this right upstairs when before we started recording, where like they would talk about the fact like you put your hand on the table and you would ask, but are you actually touching the table though? Like it's that type of crap. And it's completely disingenuous. It's full of woo and it's full of crap. And if you want to get a laugh, go watch it. But the fact that I saw that he would be the main or one of the main characters in this documentary series, I was immediately skeptical of his character to begin with. And at least for me, it doesn't seem like a big stretch to know that he was going from like crazy pseudoscience to this weird like commercial cult.
And there was a lot of pseudoscience in the cult as well.
Right. Well, I remember them talking about in a scene, Mark was talking to Keith about like, yeah, I heard you talked about like black holes or like something like black holes and had quantum physics and stuff and like the secret to aging. You want to talk about immortality for a little bit? Like it's that type of crap. So I feel like we're already not dealing with the most reasonable people here, where again, we kind of talked about this in the latest episode where we discussed whether or not Trump was a cult leader or not. You don't have to be super dumb or crazy to get involved with a cult. But I think this was also leading people into this to begin with. It was like a pipeline.
He was definitely primed. People
Yes.
that are willing to take any explanation that sounds like it might be true without doing any real research or not really understanding what science is.
That's exactly what this was. And it took a lot of those types of people in this cult.
One of the other major figures,
And this I wasn't ready for. I was not ready for this one.
actress Allison Mack. She's been described as the Tom Cruise of NXIVM. She is responsible for recruiting many of the women into the secret organization DOS within NXIVM that we'll get to. She allegedly came up with the branding idea, which is
Oh my God.
kind of, I think,
was
the main
horrifying.
focal point
Yeah.
of like the fact that this is a cult and there's abuse. When we get to DOS, we'll
We'll talk about it.
we'll bring it up. I think our podcast should be called "We'll Get to That."
I was told that they got like several actors and actresses for this group for marketing purposes. And I didn't really know him because I don't really know actors and actresses well. I knew Allison Mack or Allie Mack. So this was a big shock to me because I'm like, oh, she just kind of disappeared for a while. This is where she was. And then as it went later into the documentary, I'm like, oh my God, Allie Mack, what are you doing?
She really does become a ringleader.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I was not ready for any of this.
One of the other very important people here is Claire Bronfman, and she is an heiress to the Seagram's Liquor Company. Her dad, Edgar Bronfman, was a billionaire and did go after NXIVM. The bad press they got in Forbes at one point was apparently his doing, as both of his daughters were involved. Also, her sister Sarah was heavily involved in NXIVM.
I think in a lot of recruitment projects, if I remember correctly.
Oh, they were the ones bringing in all of the
The rich people. and
all the
stuff.
people in Mexico, like
Yeah.
they had an ex-president's son in
Yep.
the group in Mexico, and she was
And that was all them.
a big part, right? Because all the real super rich, influential families, they all kind of know each other. So she brought that, and also spent roughly $150 million on NXIVM, mainly from January 2005 until late 2007. Keith Raniere lost nearly $70 million in commodities trading. He told Claire that the losses were due to market manipulation.
Oh my God.
By her father, Edgar. That's why I lost all that money. Your dad's trying to ruin us.
And that's
'cause
why
he
we
hates me.
And this is why we can't have Robinhood anymore. So what exactly is NXIVM or the ESP programs? Well, it's not programs, it's just ESP.
So it reminds me very much of Scientology, where you take courses and it's set up like a self-help group. And you start off, you go through a class that's really about building up your self-esteem, making you more confident, enabling you to speak in public, help with shyness issues.
They call them human potential programs.
And they do use some basic psychology, and they are helpful to a lot of people. So you go through this class, you make some progress, you spend some money.
Well, and I'm glad you brought the connection to Scientology with this, because that's exactly what I thought too, where this seems very much like, was it Thetan reading sessions? Where
Well, that comes after. You start off with literally the same thing where you go through.
Well, sure. But like the idea between like you have more mundane self-help type of things, and then go into the crazy stuff.
Dianetics was all about
Self-help and
psychology.
yes. So these ESPs were about like 5-day sessions, I think, where you pay, I think like almost a couple $1,000s for a 5-day session.
Intensive.
Yeah, and you would go into this like weird, again, they actually have a part in it where I think Sarah, one of the characters or one of the people followed in the movie, where she said she was expecting like this big Tony Robbins-esque thing, and it was just like some like creepy people like in a hotel banquet hall for 5 days. It was just really weird and off-putting for most of it.
And she says that she was freaked out by, call me Vanguard, call me Prefect. And
right.
They have different colored sashes that they have to wear. And all of that stuff, she said, did seem weird to her. She did not enjoy that. And they were red flags initially. But, well, you're there for self-help. She's a struggling actress. You already spent the money. It's probably more than, a month's rent for you to go to these classes. You might as well stick it out and see what happens. Yeah. Right?
Well, and they do a lot of what other commercial cults do, where first off, you have to pay to get into these things. That's number one, right? But usually what they'll do is they describe a ranking or caste system in this structure. And many people do different types of things. Like Amway talks about the various levels that you have to do to get into like the number of people you bring in. You get to like the platinum level versus the bronze level or whatever it is. In this one, like Jason said, they use sashes that you literally have on your body. And this actually, I think, comes from Keith's or Ranieri's experience with judo, I'm guessing, because it was very judo or martial arts based.
The colors.
Yeah, where they had different colors, and then you could be like a 3rd degree yellow thing. I think that was a coach. And you'd have like little pieces of tape on your sash. And the way that worked is the more you did, the higher the levels you would, which would supposedly give you more benefits of the program. They would also talk about emphasizing different types of rituals. So like doing things as group chanting in these sessions, doing special handshakes in these sessions, and whatever types of things to get people into the idea that this is an in-group type of experience with a bunch of other strangers, which helps basically create a community around these weird ideals.
One thing that I noticed, which is very similar to Scientology, they talk about the tech.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how they refer to the different techniques that are in the group. And that is exactly the same word that Scientologists use. One of those techs is rational inquiry, which is a process to find quantifiable results with how people think.
Yeah, they tried really hard to make this like a science-based type of group. And I think in the series, they talked about how they actually patented the rational inquiry process as like an AI or something like that. It was like really weird.
One thing that comes up quite a bit is EMs, or exploration of meaning. And that's supposed to be a method to uncover fear surrounding someone's phobias. And this is a big one to me because this is how they break down your defenses.
Yes, exactly.
So if you were to say, well, I don't feel comfortable with this, they would say, okay, let's explore that. And they turn it from you not liking something that they're doing or something that's going on, and they turn it around on you and say, well, how is this your fault? If you are feeling uncomfortable, it's not because of what we're doing. There's something wrong with you. You have a fear that we need to explore.
Well, not even that, but you need to shed it, basically.
Right.
This was the unfreezing, changing, and refreezing process that we talked about before with a lot of cults do. And this would be that time where this happens, where they would actually make you unfreeze the behavior, which would be breaking down the individual, make them change, which would be shedding those weird feelings and phobias of it to bring on a new identity within the group.
And that gets you used to them doing that, so to the point where you're in a situation where you don't feel right, you're not even going to say anything. You would say, oh, that's my fault. That's on me. I have to learn how to get rid of that disintegration, as they would call it. It's another thing, like all of this different terminology and vocabulary, that is another way to get you stuck with that group.
Well, and that's a good part of like the parallels between them and Scientology, where like the disintegrations, I would say that is the thetans of Scientology or of this group.
Then they do the exact same thing.
Yes. Where you have to get rid of the thetans. In this group, you have to get rid of the disintegration disintegrations.
When you do the readings in Scientology and they find something that triggers the E-meter, it's usually they're making you go through bad memories, things that you've experienced in your life that make you uncomfortable. And
Trying
the
to break
E-meters
you down.
are just like a cheap lie detector, essentially. And so you can see like, oh, you're uncomfortable, your hands are sweaty or whatever, you're reacting. And then like, let's go over that. Let's talk about that. And they get it so that you don't react anymore on the meter. And that's essentially, this group is doing the same thing with let's examine that. Let's explore that to get you used to those uncomfortable things, the things that you don't like that they're doing. So the idea with the vocabulary, at least in my mind, and I will say right off the bat, I've never taken any classes in psychiatry, psychotherapy, anything. I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, that goes for every topic ever.
You don't know what you're talking
specifically
about?
here, I have no idea what I'm talking about. But to me, using language like that and different vocabularies makes it so that it's hard for you to talk to anyone outside of that group.
Yes.
Because they're not going to know what you're talking about. And it makes it so that the only people that you can discuss this stuff with are inside the group.
Yes, exactly.
And that's just another way to isolate you.
Well, and then I have a quote from the series from Mark Vicente, who was actually doing a session with, oh gosh, what was the Nancy Salzman?
Yeah, the co-founder.
Yeah, he was doing an EM session with her, and he said, and I quote, I didn't even know what language she was speaking. It just sounded all like garbled sounds. And I think now, again, I'm already very skeptical of Mark's perspective of a lot of this type of stuff because I have no idea where his head's at for a lot of this. But this sounds a lot like DPDs and word salad, a lot like stuff like Deepak Chopra would do, where he would say a lot of very, very big and unintelligible words that you would have no idea what what it even means. And like Jason said, since it's all in-group levels of vocabulary, he would have no idea or no clue what this means. But in actuality, it means nothing. That's what I would assume it would be, personally.
And again, she was a practitioner of the neuro-linguistic programming, so I can imagine she just kept questioning everything he was saying.
Right.
And pushing everything back on him.
That's what it sounds like, too, from the clips in the series.
And those different sashes, they call that the stripe path, which is, again, very similar to Scientology.
Yep.
And the bridge. And it's also a way to kind of keep people invested because you always want to go to that next level, that you want to get that next achievement in the game. You want to keep playing for another hour, get that next power up.
Well, and this is where you may see a lot of similarity to MLMs or like things like Amway, because the way you move up the ranking system, according to people who were in the group, was you had to take more curriculum or more classes and lessons. You had to keep enrolling others. So you actually had a quota to meet if you were at a specific level. And then, of course, you had to keep removing disintegrations, which meant more sessions or more EM sessions with people where you could disclose more vulnerable facts about yourself. And I think one thing that really stood out to me, Jason, I don't know if you noticed this too, but when they show clips of people moving up in ranks, they actually did it in very large and emotional gatherings as a big event that took place where they would call people up on stage and people are crying and cheering to say that they moved up to the next rank or something. And I think that's something to take into account as well, is that they really try hard to push the emotional element of all this stuff to make them more invested in this type of system. And that when people are crying, giving out these special privileges and these next levels, it kind of puts people in a weird psychological state thinking, yes, this is where I need to be because this is what matters to everyone around me right now.
It's very powerful when you're in that giant room full of people that are all that into something and that excited about it. Yeah. You want to be the next guy called up on stage.
And then this is also where you may see people start getting frustrated with the group at higher levels because they would actually promise compensation for the people at the higher levels of the group. When we talk about Sarah, who I think was specifically asking for compensation, was promised to get paid for her work, who was actually, I think, putting more than full time. I think it was around 70 hours a week for this group already at the level she was at. And they told her, once you get to the next level, you'll start getting compensated for it. Well, once she got there, they'll say, well, we actually changed the rules. It's going to be at level 5 as opposed to level 3 or something like that. And they kept doing this to avoid paying people for the tons of work they were forced to do for this group.
That's why they should have went with a religion. Then you don't have to pay anybody, because that's what Scientology does.
Right.
In yet another Scientology-like move, they started trying to recruit Hollywood actors and actresses, some of the most insecure and desperate people in the world. But yeah, particularly, I think that it is, and you saw it with Scientology, that's when they took off, is when they started recruiting from Hollywood. And the thing is, like, if you get a part and people ask you, all your actor friends, you're at an audition, oh, hey, I saw you got this part. Oh, what did you do? What made you stand out? And you go, oh, well, I've started taking these classes.
Yep.
And that's helped me. Those people are desperate for any advantage they can get. So that's a good way to bring more people in.
So why don't you read off some of these
Sure.
actors and actresses?
So Allison Mack, we talked about. She was on Smallville and Wilfred, which I am not the Smallville. I'm too old for that. It's like a Superman,
like as a teenager. Or something. Yeah,
like a teen drama Superman. But Wilfred, I remember. Kristen Creek, also from Smallville and the Beauty and the Beast series on the CW. Sarah Edmondson, who was a main character in The Vow. She was on Stargate, SG-1. She did a lot of kind of smaller bit parts. Nikki Klein, who was in Battlestar Galactica, and, interestingly enough, who I hear is the current leader of the DOS group, and still in what's left of NXIVM. Grace Park, who was also in Battlestar Galactica and the Hawaii Five-0 reboot. I think she's probably the most accomplished actress in this list. Bonnie Peasy, we'll say. She was Aunt Beru in the Star Wars prequels, and she was also heavily featured. She left the group fairly early on. She was married to Mark.
Yep.
And kind of led to him leaving the group, and we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. That was a part that surprised me, and in a good way. I was pleasantly surprised that when given basically the choice between his wife and the cult that he wasn't fully invested in, he chose his wife.
Oh, I'm right there with you with that too. Where even with was it Sarah and her husband?
Yeah, Nippy.
Yeah, or whatever.
Yeah,
I think it was actually
Anthony
Nippy.
was his name.
Yeah.
And he was definitely fighting it. The Nippy guy was definitely fighting it up until the point where she said she was branded.
Right.
And then he was like, we're done. I'm out. Let's go now. And that would have, I was like, wow, that's actually a reasonable reaction from
But I'm right
somebody
there
in a
with
cult.
you though, because I would have totally expected these like relationships to go completely sour because of this, because that's my experience with cults. That's what usually happens in the real world. So the fact that these relationships actually survived one of their members leaving the cult or having issues with the cult is amazing to me. So no, I'm right there with you. I was super happy and thrilled that they actually ended up being okay with each other at the end of it all. And okay, before we even move on though, we have to talk about the fact that while they were marketing to all these rich people and getting a lot of press and a lot of attention, they even got the support of the Dalai Lama, which I was not expecting. And now granted, like he probably didn't even know half the makings of the group, but the way that he was quoted in the show was saying that he had to support like any group of people that had some kind of good humanitarian effect on the rest of the world. So he probably just like, yeah, I don't really care about these people. They're probably doing some good or something. It's fine, whatever.
So the story is that they're getting all this money from the Bronfmans, that they paid like $2 million to get this event, like adding a stop onto the U.S. tour that he had in 2009, adding the stop in Albany, which was canceled at one point. So they announced that they were going to do it. People knew that NXIVM was involved. There had already been bad press about them in the Albany Times-Union and some other news sources at that time, and they were already being called a cult. So they canceled the trip due to people reaching out to them and saying, don't do this. This group is a cult. You'll regret it.
Yep.
And then they show in the series that they actually met with the Dalai Lama. So the inner circle, Keith Raniere, the Bronfmans, Nancy, I believe, was there, where they had this personal meeting with the Dalai Lama. And as they showed in the documentary, they basically talked him into agreeing, like, we're not so bad, see your meeting with us. What you don't see, and which came out years later.
Yeah, I had no idea about any of this, and this blew my mind.
Sarah Bronfman had a sexual relationship in 2009, the same year that this visit, with Lama Tenzin Dandan, the Dalai Lama's gatekeeper, who arranged the appearance. And now, as a monk, he had taken a vow of celibacy.
What is even happening?
And when this came out, he was removed from that position as well.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. So are we really saying that we have like Dalai Lama like drama going on because of this?
Lama drama.
Lama.
There was some llama drama. And as most things with NXIVM, it involved sex. All right. Make a long story short, to give you the background that you need here.
They kept expanding.
Yeah, they kept kind of creating these little subgroups within ESP, NXIVM, whatever. The first one was JNESS, and I cannot find what that stands for. JNESS.
I don't think it stood for anything. I think it was just what it was.
It was founded in 2006 as a series of exclusive workshops, primarily geared towards women, although it began with both men and women involved. The root of the group was one of Ranieri's teachings, that adherents must accept that women and men are wired differently. Men are repressed and do not enjoy the same rich experience of existence as women, but they have an understanding of right and wrong. Women can be disloyal, have tantrums, and get away with whatever they prefer.
I remember this is supposed to be a support group.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a women empowerment group, and they're like, yeah, you guys suck.
And like, even in the show, they talk about how this was meant to be like a women empowerment and like a feminist type of group, which, you know, we talked about this off the podcast as well, is we don't really know what their political leanings really were for this group.
It sounded quite liberal, but then was a Fox News part that...
Well, especially with this type of stuff too, where it sounds very liberal and progressive, and they push themselves as like liberal and progressive people who are trying to make the world a better place. A lot of it's evolved the humanistic approach to things, which I declare myself, I am also a humanist.
And I know you haven't gotten this far in the series, but they definitely break this down as, and a lot of the things that you hear Keith Raniere saying really remind me of like anti-feminist MRA rhetoric. And he talks about how, you know, men are naturally polyamorous. They're meant to be with a lot of different women. Women are supposed to be monogamous.
Oh, of course.
And he talks about how...
Did he ever say he was the top lobster?
he said some other Jordan Peterson stuff. He basically said that he wishes he could hit women. That's a Jordan Peterson line. He said that, you know, as a boy, you're taught you can't hit women, and that's not fair.
Yeah.
Because when a girl hits you over the head with her sand bucket and you can't retaliate, you know it's not. Let me tell any women who are listening to this, no, that's not true. That's not the way men think of women. I do not think it's unfair that I cannot beat women. And I don't have a problem with that. Now, there's plenty of women that would beat me up. I'm not, a UFC fighter. I know there's much more variance within gender than comparing the two genders. Like, that's what science says. That's what reason says to me. Yes, we're somewhat different at the extremes. You can pick out differences for sure. I don't want to get into a fight with a man versus, I don't think violence is the answer to problems. And this is a guy who's supposed to have this non-violent movement.
Right.
And he's like saying like, well, yeah, I wish I could have punched that little girl in the face.
That's why I don't understand about this group, is where they're supposed to be these super humanistic and ethical people, yet they have these really crazy and weird and restrictive guidelines and rules and regulations in place. And all the members are totally fine with it. And they see no contradiction at all.
Because they're taught that if they do, the problem is them. The problem's not with the tech, it's with you.
And I think it's kind of goes even further in their other group, which was the SOP, or the Society of Protectors, which is the men's group of it all. And again, the fact that it's a men's group about being a society of protectors, of being about what a man should be.
Right. What are men's roles in society?
You can already tell where the rabbit hole is going to be going with this.
It was founded in 2011. SOP members had to provide collateral to belong to the group. That will make a reoccurrence, which usually included sums of money as high as $1,500. Mark Vincente claimed that if members did what they were supposed to do, they got the money back. If not, they didn't. SOP members also participated in readiness drills to keep them on alert in case they were ever needed in an emergency, like if a member went missing.
And keep that word in mind too, the word collateral, because that's a very common word used in any of this. And we'll get into this with the DAS group, but I want to take a quick side first, where even in Raniere's talks and things like that, he talks about with your word means so much more when there's something behind it. If you just say, hey, I'm going to go do this for you, but there's no reason why, there's no consequence for you to not do it. Your word basically means nothing. Therefore, for your word to mean something, there has to be a consequence for it. This is actually a pretty interesting concept that actually I heard from another philosopher recently, where he started making bets with conspiracy theorists saying, hey, if this is true, bet me $100 and we'll see which one is actually true. And the idea is then once you start taking their money from them multiple times, they'll stop believing in the conspiracy theory. It's the same principle here, but used for evil, basically. So please keep the idea of collateral in your head because it's about to get much worse.
Speaking of being used for evil, also the readiness drills come into play as well. Now we get to DOS, DOS, which in this instance does not stand for Disk Operating System, but instead stands for Dominus Obsequious Sororium, also known as the Vow, which is where we get the title to the series.
Exactly.
DOS is the subgroup that gained the most attention.
As it should.
As it definitely should have. It's the most scandalous for sure. And that ultimately...
That's putting it lightly.
And that ultimately led to the charges being filed against Raniere and other NXIVM leaders. Described by members as a sorority, it functioned on a recruitment system, multi-level marketing. Yep. Each woman was recruited by a master and was encouraged to recruit more slaves. But members claimed it was a self-empowerment group, not anything scandalous.
And let's pause there really quick. So this was like multi-level marketing, but like the worst, like if like Satan himself thought of multi-level marketing. Like this was the worst possible use of multi-level marketing I've ever seen in my entire life. And they literally did call themselves masters and slaves. When they texted each other, they had to go, good morning, master. And they'll say, oh, how's my slave doing today?
And they would say, oh, it's just the term we use. It doesn't mean that. It's like teacher and student. But that's not at all.
Then you would use the term teacher and student. You wouldn't use master and slave.
And they treated the slaves as slaves.
Literally.
Like, I tell you what to do. You have to ask me before you do anything. You have to, if I text you, you have to respond within 2 seconds or you get punished.
Yep. Well, and this also goes into what now we were going to talk about other rules for the group, which include like things like extreme dieting. And this all came from the idea that of the self-empowerment theme for this group, they would set goals for themselves and the masters would be the ones that they would have to be accountable to overcome the supposed goals. So being in Hollywood, a lot of these women were afraid of their weight. So they wanted to lose weight. And they go a lot into detail about how women in this group are counting calories like crazy, basically.
Yeah, only the women's group has the calorie counting as like
exactly.
a stipulation.
But what's weird about this group is that they had to ask permission from their masters to get calories. So they would literally have to text their master saying, excuse me, master, can I have 93 calories right now?
Along with a picture of what it was that they were going to eat.
And you would see these women starving themselves because they wouldn't get the calories that we're supposed to be having.
Also makes them more suggestible.
Yes. So they were talking about Ally Mack in the show, and they were saying about how she hit her goal weight because she was in this group. And the woman asked her, what's your weight? And she said 103 pounds. That's insane. And that was their goal weight. So they were literally starving themselves for their masters. And what's even weirder is that they have to actually prove themselves to be a part of this type of sorority or sisterhood by sleeping with Raniere. This is where the sex cult thing comes into place.
It would be one of their missions.
Yes.
To seduce Keith and then prove it by having him take a naked picture of them and send it to their master.
Yes. And I think that is a good segue for us to get back into this idea of collateral, right? Where not only did they have to give up collateral to get into the group, they had to give collateral every month.
They had to give collateral just to find out about the group.
Yeah. Well, and this was a very weird thing that I'm surprised didn't stop more people. And maybe it did, I don't know, but the show didn't really put it this way, where friends or people you cared about would like kind of vaguely suggest that they have this idea for a group that they could be a part of. And then when asked about what it was, the person who's in DOS would then have to say, well, it's so secretive, you'd have to give me your word that you would never tell anyone. And in order for you to do that, you would have to give me collateral for it. Which, I mean, imagine if one of your friends just came out of the blue and said, hey, I need super embarrassing collateral for you to even like tell you anything about what's going on in my life right now.
And the collateral, a lot of times it involved naked photographs or
making up stories of their family.
yeah, fake confessions like saying, yeah, my husband beats me and my kid.
Yep.
When it never happened. That way, well, if you were to ever tell anyone about this group or leave the group, then we would release this message that you sent and get your family in trouble. There would also be things like confessions. If they maybe had committed a crime at some point in their lives, they would have this confession that they could use against them. And again, this is something out of the Scientology playbook. They do this all the time. When they go over, like we were talking about with the e-meter, and they go over your traumatic memories.
They record it to blackmail you.
They record it to later use it against you.
Well, and that's why you see a lot of people like, well, I don't know if he's still in. Tom Cruise is still in, I think, technically. Yes. Because the rumors are is that the church has so much blackmail on Tom Cruise that he would never be able to leave.
That's why they get this collateral on people to enslave them mentally as well as, in some cases, physically.
And I think that brings us to the last thing, too, for this DOS group, which is, like you said before, the most infamous part of this group, which is they literally branded these women with a hot iron.
With a cauterizing pen. Apparently, they had someone who was a doctor that was part of this
that
group.
was insane. The whole breakdown when Sarah was talking about the actual process that happened, where they blindfolded a bunch of these women, where, okay, if you're in the DOS group, you're supposedly not aware of who else is in the group outside of your master. You don't even know who your master's master is. And again, this is where that multi-level marketing scheme comes in, where you're supposed to find slaves yourself to become a master of other people, but you don't know who is around you in this DOS group until you get to the branding ceremony, where you basically just go to someone's house, and I think in this case it was Allie Mack's house.
Yes.
And they would basically take turns, hold women down, and brand them with basically what turned out to be a combination of Keith Raniere's and Allie Mack's initials as a symbol, like right close to their vagina.
The story of this, Allison Mack says that she came up with it. The original idea was a tattoo, and she didn't think that was far. Like, people get drunk and get tattoos all the time. We need something more extreme. And it's things like that that have led to her being thought of as a little bit more than a victim and more so as one of the perpetrators of some of the crimes in this group. Speaking of crimes, this story does have a somewhat happy ending despite all of the abuse.
These people are not the Trumps and will actually face consequences for their crimes.
And you will learn about some things that are not in the View here because they didn't, I don't know if they didn't want to or a lot of it didn't come out yet, but Keith Raniere also had a lot of sex with underage girls, and that was not in the show, and that was part of what he ultimately got convicted of. But the downfall of the groups really starts in October of 2017. October 17th, the New York Times publishes a major expose about the organization and specifically its branding ritual. Sarah Edmondson is the face of this story, and as documented in the series, the New York Times had this story and was really reluctant to publish it, didn't think there was any need to, have any kind of rush to put it out there, and all of these people are waiting around that have left this group and are terrified that they're going to be served with all of these papers, waiting for the New York Times to publish this. But the Harvey Weinstein story broke on October 5th. All of the Me Too movement started to gain steam, and that's what everyone was interested in. That's what led to them finally publishing this story.
Yeah, that's not frustrating at all.
Right. Yeah, your entire life. So, and the main reason all these people were afraid, and this is another Scientology connection, if you left the company, they would sue you for everything.
Yes.
They would file 200 lawsuits against you. This is what happened to one lady who left, just to keep you constantly in litigation, broke, because they had the Seagram's fortune.
Right, so they had tons of rich people at their disposal.
To waste on filing these lawsuits, and they would destroy people who left them. That's fair game. That's what Scientology does. If you're suppressive, and they use that exact same term here, if you're suppressive, someone who moves against you, we will utterly destroy you. And that's what they were doing. So everyone was just terrified that if nothing were to happen, there were no actual consequences to these stories getting out there, which there hadn't been in the past, that they were going to be fighting lawsuits for the rest of their lives. But thanks to the New York Times story, shortly after it was released, Keith Raniere and other inner circle members of NXIVM fled to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, to a villa there. Then, on March 27th of 2018, so 5 months after this story broke, the FBI arrests and charges founder Keith Raniere with sex trafficking. Eventually, he's also charged with racketeering conspiracy, forced labor conspiracy, wire fraud conspiracy, sex trafficking conspiracy, attempted sex trafficking, conspiracy to commit identity theft, child pornography, conspiracy involving acts of child sexual exploitation. So what came out after this story, the big story broke, is that they were illegally bringing up people from Mexico and committing identity theft to get them into the country. And that's where you get a lot of these sex trafficking, because they're literally bringing these women up so that they could be sex slaves for Keith Raniere.
Jesus Christ.
And then it came out that he had had sex with multiple underage women, one of which had killed herself at one point. So a lot of things that they couldn't really charge him with having sex with a minor because she wasn't around to testify anymore. And another person that was involved in this went missing in Alaska that probably killed themselves as well. These people absolutely destroyed people's lives. Luckily, he was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 120 years in prison. He's currently in Arizona at a federal prison there.
Good, let him rot.
When he was in, so there's jail and prison, right? Jail you go to while you're still going through trial and all that. He was in jail in Manhattan, and there are still followers of his that would go outside of the prison there and dance for him.
Oh my God.
And the other prisoners. And one of those people was what is reported as the current head of DOS, the actress Nikki Klein, who was married at one point to Allison Mack.
Oh.
Yeah, that's another turn of events that you don't hear about in The Vow. Allison Mack had married Nikki Klein so that Nikki Klein could stay in the U.S. because she's Canadian.
Oh.
They have since gotten divorced. And like I said, Nikki Klein is still in whatever group exists. She's still a true believer as far as I know. I've seen videos where she's saying, that's not a sex cult. I don't even know what that is. So not everyone was able to escape with their faculties intact. Some of the other arrests involved, Allison Mack was arrested on April 20th of 2018, charged with racketeering conspiracy, forced labor conspiracy. I won't go through the whole list. A lot of the same stuff, sex trafficking. She has pleaded guilty, but is still awaiting sentencing. She is facing up to 40 years in prison. Claire Bronfman, Nancy Salzman, Lauren Salzman, and Kathy Russell, who we haven't talked about. She wasn't really involved in the group. She was a longtime accountant, and she did help them with some of this identity theft and things like that, were arrested and charged with racketeering conspiracy on July 24th. Nancy Salzman, who was the co-founder, was the first to strike a deal. She pled guilty to racketeering conspiracy, and she's facing between 33 and 41 months. She's currently under house arrest awaiting sentencing.
Man, that's it?
Yeah, for a co-founder of this group. Lauren Salzman, her daughter, was the only co-defendant to testify against Keith Raniere in court. She pled guilty to racketeering conspiracy and racketeering. She is also under house arrest and waiting sentencing. Claire Bronfman, the money behind this endeavor, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to conceal and harbor illegal aliens for financial gain, as well as fraudulent use of identification, and she received 6 years and 9 months in prison, which she is, of course, appealing. The accountant, Kathy Russell, pled guilty to racketeering conspiracy, and she is awaiting sentencing. I imagine she will get a very light sentence due to not really being involved in the operation of the group. One horrendous thing that came out of this is Lauren Salzman, Nancy's daughter, admitted to imprisoning one of the Mexican citizens that they brought up illegally for 2 years.
What? I did not hear about this.
Yeah, and she was underage. because she admitted to having a crush on someone in the group that was not Keith Raniere.
Oh my God.
So her penance, her punishment
Was
for
being in
that
prison?
breach, as they called it, is, to basically being told that she had to stay in a room and that if she disobeyed them, like she wasn't chained in there, like she was just told you have to stay in this room, but if she tried to escape, that they would leave her in Mexico without any identification.
What the hell?
So I think Lauren Salzman is not going to get the light sentence that some of the others might. I really hope that not too much happens to like Allison Mack. I mean, she was clearly part of it. She does need to pay some kind of...
Well, there were a lot of rumors that she was the head of a lot of the DOS groups too.
Oh, she was. She was definitely like but she was also in a cult at that point. Right. She was a fully indoctrinated member of the cult. And
she was obsessed with Keith Raniere.
Right. And yes, she can admit that, okay, the branding was my idea, but it's Keith's initials. That's not an accident. And yes, you can hear they have some of these conversations tape that you'll hear in the show. He is definitely leading her down these paths. And this is another aspect of the neuro-linguistic programming is you suggest something to somebody like, oh, I'm not telling you to do this, but maybe, one of the things that you could do is this thing I want you to do. And then of course you're going to do it, especially if you're, a fully...
Well, it's power dynamics, right? Where it's like if the president of the United States told you to do something, you would probably do it because it's the president of the United States.
Like, say, storm the U.S. Capitol.
Or look into dirt on your political opponents.
As examples. Theoretical.
Yeah, just, out of thin air.
So
what do you make of this whole thing? Other than this is like absolutely insane.
It's a good demonstration because you can watch it happen. And the most impact this has is these people recounting this after they're out and talking about how they got their friends into these situations who are now stuck in there.
Yeah.
And how bad they feel. How all these people that they talked to, they said, this is a good group. You should want to be a part of this.
Well, that Sarah woman talked about how I think she got 2,000 members by herself into the group.
She was the head of a Vancouver branch.
Yeah.
And their main thing, and that's when all of this was coming out about DOS and it being basically a sex cult for Keith Raniere, at first she didn't believe it because she had never slept with Keith. And then it kind of came to light that she wasn't recruited for Keith. She was recruited so that she could bring other people in because she was...
Well, she was good at it.
One of their top people.
Yeah.
And really how that made her feel. And just like knowing that you were used in that way to destroy people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine what that would be like. I mean, we were part of a group that we spent a lot of time and energy and effort to advance and get...
And do what we thought was right.
Right, because we thought, we agreed with their goals. And then it's nothing like... I'm not accusing them of being a cult. They're dicks, but they're not a cult. And eventually, because they didn't care about the goal, they only cared about becoming influential and popular. They pivoted, like you saw with, we're going to go from vitamins to self-help. Our group went from atheism and humanism to right-wing politics.
Yep.
And that obviously we both left at that point. And I did see some of the tendencies here too, like people who leave are shunned.
Yep.
And, you never have anything to do with them anymore and you hate them and they're bad people now that they left. Those types of things that you're like, wow, I still am friends with these people. We were all a community. Nothing's changed between yesterday and today, but now we can't have anything to do with them anymore.
But that's what high control groups and authoritarians do. And I think for me, I would personally say watch this documentary or this docuseries. I know there's other ones out there. We haven't watched those. We're only talking about the Vow on HBO, but I highly recommend watching it because it's super revealing and pretty eye-opening for a lot of stuff. And for me, now this may sound like a shameless plug, but I would seriously consider listening back to our Is Trump a Cult Leader episode, where we talk about and break down the various ways that cults brainwash people and use mind control techniques to keep people from leaving these cults and to get them interested and to have them grow and expand and everything like that. Listen to that episode, listen to what we talk about, and watch how this is like an exact or a perfect example of the exact processes that were used in our episode that we talked about. So like we said before, the idea of forming a new identity, shedding your past self, isolating yourself with only the community, forcing all of your time and energy to be used on the group's resources, creating some kind of level of dependence upon people within the group, the whole masters and slaves scenario. This is a perfect example and a pretty straightforward example of these type of psychological techniques that are used in these more authoritarian style groups. So that's personally what I would recommend.
Hopefully you don't mind listening to a podcast that's not 100% about politics this time. We're both interested in the psychology of cults and how people do get involved and what that means. We will certainly examine other cults in the future. There are a lot more political cults, religious cults. We wanted to start with one that didn't quite have those.
Well, this was very on the nose for a lot of their stuff. I mean, not every group makes you wear sashes to say what level you are in, you know?
This is a textbook cult.
Yes. Well, we talk about this, even though this is kind of like a political show about of stuff we're interested in. I want to just clarify again, understanding cult psychology and the dynamics of psychology in typical political behavior is super important. And for me, one of my big awakenings is why I'm going to grad school in political psychology now, is because I realized that you can take the same authoritarian styles of thinking and apply it to a political setting. So when you look at Keith Raniere and the things that he does, you can see our politicians doing the exact same thing, and using people who support various politicians do the exact same thing that people in this cult do.
One thing that they definitely talked about, and like I said, they had gotten bad press and people calling them cults. And you saw like the Dalai Lama was aware of that and didn't want to come to their event. They did exactly what you see Trump do with, oh, they're just trying to attack us. That's the media. They're biased against us. They don't want to see us succeed.
It's fake news.
And they even started a group called like The Knife. And they talk about it. I know you haven't gotten that far yet because it's kind of later on in the series. And that's where I say I'm not sure what their political leanings are, because they had the spokesman for this group go on Fox News and talk about how slanted the media was. And they had like a rating system. Like it's 62% slanted against Donald Trump, and basically feeding Fox News what they wanted to hear, which of course they didn't vet this group and see that they were a cult because they just wanted to hear like, yes, say that the media is biased against Trump. That's what we want.
Well, because Fox News viewers are also a cult in their own way too.
And they do come to the realization that Mark does realize that the only reason that he was charged with doing that was for propaganda, so they could say all of these media people coming after us, that's just all biased and slanted emotional language. They don't have any real facts against us. So you get to kind of see his realization of that. And that's where I think this series really shines.
Yes.
Is they get those reactions of people kind of coming to grips with the fact that they were a part of this.
So yeah, I would recommend, again, watch the series. It's incredibly eye-opening, but pay attention to the techniques that are used. Pay attention to how they get members into this group, and pay attention to what Keith Raniere says and does in the context of what we talked about, where he's intentionally trying to manipulate people for his own personal gain. So, but with that said, I think we could probably wrap it up.
We'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in the next episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at ThinkProPod. You can email us at thinkpropod@gmail.com. And remember, when in doubt, think progressively. Is horrendous. It's absolutely terrible. Terrible. God damn it.
Now it's Medea's Think Progressively. It's terrible.
God. So, GameStocks. Oh, God.
GameStonk.
GameStocks. Actually, I want to get their actuals.
Get those numbers. Joe's gonna get those numbers.
So let's talk about NXIVM, the little purple pill.
No, we're talking about the cult. Did you do research on the wrong?
Oh, whoops.